Hey folks, it's me, RiggerM71, and welcome to another video. Sorry I haven't been around for a while, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. Regardless, I wanted to discuss a game that I've been playing a great deal of lately, and that game is Fallout 4. I realize this title has been pretty much covered to death on gaming sites and on YouTube, but now that it's been out for quite a while, I think it's a good time to take an objective look at the final product. Aside from future patches or expansions, for better or worse, this is Fallout 4. To start off, let's talk about one of the more controversial subjects that was brought up before the game's release, the graphics. After Bethesda unveiled its first gameplay video, and it eventually trickled down to the gaming community, there was some discussion about how it didn't exactly look like a next-gen title. Many people claim the texture quality didn't look that much different than Fallout 3, despite using a beefed-up version of the creation engine first used in Skyrim. The controversy was amplified even more when the PC requirements were first posted, and many claimed that they seemed excessive for the perceived substandard quality of the graphics shown in videos. As if that wasn't enough, some people even complained about the addition of color to the environments, which looked considerably different to those used to the traditional browns and grays of Fallout 3 or New Vegas. However, as time moved forward and more videos were released from Bethesda, the negative comments seemed to slowly go away. The game gradually began to look better to people, and many actually praised how realistic the environments looked. Whether this was a result of actual game improvements, or just gamers gradually getting over their concerns, is subjective. I suspect it was a combination of both. Personally, I think the game looks great. There is a noticeable improvement when compared to older titles using the Gamebryo engine. Models, textures, lighting, and just the general feeling of being in a post-apocalyptic environment seems greatly enhanced. I'm sure there are those who still feel unimpressed by how things look, but then that's the case with every major title that's released these days. You can't please everyone, and that's to be expected. The next thing I'd like to mention is directed at the PC release, specifically the hardware requirements. I must admit that before the game came out, I was worried about whether I would even be able to run it. Although I had recently upgraded my system, I tried very hard to stay within a tight budget, and some of my hardware choices aren't exactly what many would consider cutting edge. The following graphic gives a simple rundown of my system versus the minimum and recommended requirements. Now, for anyone who keeps tabs on current hardware specs, it should be fairly easy to see why I was a little concerned. While I do meet the majority of the minimum requirements, the situation with the graphics is a bit sketchy. Under minimum, Bethesda lists an NVIDIA GTX 550 Ti or Radeon HD 7870. According to various benchmarks, there's actually a considerable difference between the performance of these, with the 7870 usually taking a noticeable lead. Why Bethesda decided to list these two specific cards is somewhat of a mystery to me. As it turns out, my Radeon R7 260X sort of falls in the middle, and I really had to look hard at various benchmarks to determine whether I would be alright. In other words, I made an educated guess. In the end, everything turned out fine. I can run the game with a combination of high and medium settings and at 1080p, which is pretty much what I was aiming for. My frame rate seems to fall anywhere between 45 and 60 frames per second, depending on how complicated my current surroundings are. While some could argue that isn't amazing, I was pleasantly surprised, and the game seems perfectly playable to me. I'm even able to use the more advanced temporal anti-aliasing option, which by the way looks great. It's worth noting that these videos were recorded with Fraps, which tends to be somewhat of a resource hog, and the frame rate does suffer a bit here. However, when I'm not recording, everything is fine. In summary, I think Bethesda's minimum and recommended requirements are slightly inflated. I suppose they did this to be on the safe side and encourage people to upgrade their questionable hardware. However, if anyone out there has a system similar to mine, and is still wondering whether they can play Fallout 4, I would suggest going ahead and giving it a try. Unless you're the type of gamer that needs a constant 60 frames per second, I think you'll be fine. The last subjects I'd like to bring up are mainly just the basic gameplay elements, as well as a brief spoiler-free mention of the story. After all, a great-looking open-world game with cruddy controls and no immersion isn't much of a game at all. It isn't perfect, but I think Fallout 4 has avoided being one of those unfortunate titles. When Oblivion was first released, I recall many PC users complaining about the fact that the user interface had been dumbed down from previous Bethesda titles, namely Morrowind. As history tends to repeat itself, the same thing happened when Skyrim was released, and it was claimed that the UI had been even further simplified since Oblivion. The primary blame in both instances fell on the fact that the games were also released for current consoles, and had to be configured to work smoothly with those systems taken into consideration. While the debate still continues to this day, the majority have accepted the modern UI and have been able to enjoy playing these titles. For those that still can't accept things, there are now, of course, an assortment of mods designed to change things back to a more PC-centric menu structure. In my opinion, Fallout 4 seems to work much like how I remember Fallout 3 working, but with a combination of Skyrim-like presentation elements laid over the top of it. That may sound a bit vague, but it's the simplest description I can come up with. I had very few issues figuring out where things were. When navigating through the menu system, it definitely feels like the modern Bethesda games I've grown accustomed to. Although your mileage may vary with regard to the interface, I never found anything particularly game-breaking. Just remember, there will inevitably be mods designed to tailor your experience to your liking, if there aren't already. As for the main story, I can't honestly say that I was blown away by its originality, but it is somewhat different when compared to Elder Scrolls titles, or even previous Fallout games. I think the fact that there are so many side missions, factions, and so forth to occupy your time helps a great deal. In fact, I found myself having some difficulty getting around to the primary quest objectives, simply because I often become so involved with doing other things. The overall size of the world feels comparable to other open-world Bethesda titles, however it seems like there is more stuff crammed into smaller spaces than ever before. There is a lot to do, and the game offers plenty of different ways to do it. For those willing to explore and become immersed in the environment, there are few opportunities to be bored. Unless, of course, you're bored by these types of games to begin with, in which case, why bother playing at all? Well, I think I've probably said enough about Fallout 4. It's not like everyone else hasn't said a great deal concerning the subject, but I wanted to drop my 2 cents. Or in this particular case, my 2 caps. As always, don't hesitate to like or subscribe if you found this even remotely helpful or entertaining. You can also leave a comment below if you have a question, or feel like adding to the discussion. That being said, take care, and of course, have fun.